And I'm going to take over now, Yuri, because I think it's time.
Yeah.
And it's time for our next keynote speech. And that comes from your own Yuri Garcia, and our own Yuri Garcia, really. So before I read the information about your political, what am I saying? Sorry, about your academic career, um, I just wanted to say that Yuri, of course, is one of the organizing committee. There are four of us this year and last year. In fact, it's the second year when we are working in the same group of people, the same gang of children of the night, and this is myself, Yuri Garcia, it's Enrique Palafox from Mexico, who's here. Here, wave at us, Enrique. And Hans Deruis, who's also here, but hidden. I'm sorry, Hans. Sorry, it's getting late here. Of course, it's not Hans, but it's Florin. Florin is sitting at the end of the room here, and I think that we can see him. And I mentioned Hans because Hans was with me with organizing this conference since the very start. And that's why I saw his name and I thought, yeah. So it's Enrique, Yuri, Florin, and I. And we met Yuri when he arrived to Brasov, where we are right now. And then this part of the conference who are in Transylvania right now. He arrived in Brasov in 2018. And that's how we met him. We didn't know anything about Yuri. Sorry to say that, but we haven't heard about you before. But there was this guy who came all the way from Brazil, and we said, "Whoa, this is dedication, really." And I remember that he applied with two presentations, and one was film based, and the other was politically based. So there were some Brazilian guys in the audience, and they were cheering because he was talking about current affairs in Brazil at that time. So that was quite interesting. And of course, we decided to keep him forever. And he joined the organizing committee next time we organized the conference. So hence we're here, and we thank you very much because we don't want to part ever. And I hope that the cooperation is going to be well and that you will be happy with us. That's my wish on my part. And now to academic career of Yuri. Yuri Garcia is a professor of the postgraduate program in communication at the University of the State of Rio de Janeiro, a doctor and master in social communication in the postdoctoral in the communication postgraduate program at the University of State of Rio de Janeiro, postdoctoral researcher at the University of, help me out.
IMB Morumbi.
It's, thank you very much. Held a postdoctoral internship at the University of State of Rio de Janeiro with research on transpositions of comics in cinema. And that was between 2019 and 20. Coordinator of the research group, and now reflections on gender, but the first part is difficult for me.
Top mid.
So again, yes, thank you. Reflections on gender and trends in media productions. He's also the author of the book Dracula o Vampiro Cameleonico. I'm just my excellent Portuguese here. And that was published in 2014. He conducts research on cinematographic genres, especially horror and cinematographic transpositions of literary works and comics. And as I said, our very good friends, and the stage is yours, Yuri.
Yeah, thank you very much for the kind words. It's an honor to be over here again, presenting a keynote speaker. Before I start, I just wanted to make a quick observation for Gilles and Philippe that they are here. Laura wanted to watch your speeches today, but she is ill. So she sent me an email, a message saying that she was really sorry and asking me to explain to you why she couldn't appear. And that's it. She was sick and she is resting, hoping to get better. Well, I am going, last year we had the Golden Bat Award for Best PowerPoint Presentation, which of course I didn't win because people know I'm terrible with PowerPoint. So this year I'm aiming for a different thing. I'm going for the Golden Bat Award for Worst PowerPoint Presentation. I'm going to ask Guilherme Roberto to share my PowerPoint. It's going to be so bad that I'm going to use it for like 10 minutes maximum, and then I'm just going to talk a little bit.
Well, that's a challenge.
Yeah, it
That's
is
a
actually
challenge.
It's actually over here just to point some departuring structures that I want to talk about. So the biopolitical vampire, what hides beneath the reflection of our monsters? Well, what I want to do over here actually is the idea of interpreting the vampire as a political metaphor is not something new. We had in the first day Hans introducing some images of way back ago of political vampires. So we can see that it's something very common. But what I want to do in this case is actually to analyze through another side of this. First of all, highlighting that whatever I say here, I'm not presenting no truths or no universal wisdom over here. Actually, what I want is just to unveil some elements for debate. Especially because we are dealing with artistic products, and as artistic products, they are full of subjectivity and contextual configurations. So it is a very interpretive basis. So I want to bring another side for this debate. So Beto, can you pass the next slide, please? So I am departing from this that has been something that interests me for quite a long time, that is these new vampires. New vampires because I am really focused on mainstream image and cinematographic mainstream image especially, because I think that they have a dialogue, a bigger dialogue with the society in general and more internationally. So what I've been noticing through the last years, this is 2000 from until now, is that we have these new vampires over here. And last year I had a presentation about these new vampires. And today I want to get these new vampires and use as a basis for understanding some hypotheses that I have. And what are these new vampires? Actually, these new vampires are vampires that they are not part of what we commonly know as a vampire, that villain, that character in the horror genre, but they are new configurations of approaching this. We have Twilight, that is Magda's favorite movie, over there, that shows this romantic and shining vampire and a little bit stalker and creepy in some aspects.
Watch out, young man.
Yeah, I'm just saying truths over here. We have Blade, and we have that character from Underworld that are superheroes. We have for Only Lovers Left Alive, that are these very philosophical and existential vampires and truly romantic and into each other with some ethic and moral codes. We have the funny vampires like Johnny Depp in Dark Shadows, the vampires from What We Do in the Shadows. We have Dracula becoming a superhero as well in Dracula Untold, probably one of the most hated movies in this conference. And of course, we have Hotel Transylvania. What I'm saying over here is not that we don't have villains anymore as vampires. We had the Demeter movie this year. Of course, we continue having them. But what I can notice is that when we are seeing these most trendy movies, the most blockbuster movies that are being produced around Hollywood, it's hard to find the classic villain that we had as a vampire. And all of those villainous reconfigurations. But that mode of vampire is not very commonly found. What we can find a lot nowadays is these new proposals of new vampires, and I want to understand why. Of course, we have the elements of creativity, narrative creativity, but actually, this would explain having more things, not necessarily this being a trend, being what is more consumed. And so returning to Nina Auerbach, that is a great book about vampires. She says that every time that we have produces a vampire that reflects with this time that we live in. Now, so what we can see over here is what I call, and some theorists call as well, as a domestication of our monsters. Of course, not a general rule, but we are passing through this moment that we have this domestication of our monsters. We have even the Disney villains are being humanized now, and we have all of this aspect. And when we look about to the contemporary scenario, what we have over there that is really, really trendy in terms of internet debate and and even in the academic area, is a debate about diversity, representativeness, difference, and of course, new places of speech. So this makes a good starting point to understand not only the changes, that these changes actually, but some of the bases of these creations that allowed this new chapter of the vampire and monsters in general. Because if, as Nina Auerbach says, it reflects the times that we live in, so of course these debates are going to be reflected in our audiovisual production, and especially in the vampire production. And when I say vampires and monsters in general, it's because I want to start thinking about the monster in general and then go to the specific case of the vampire. So what is the monster? What is a monster, actually? So, Beto, can you go to the next slide? Well, the Portuguese theorist José Gil, he said that's the actual intense fascination with monstrosity. Monsters are not absolutely necessary to continue believing ourselves human. However, the monster does not situate itself outside the human domain. It is found in its limit. Well, José Gil, he has a very clear influence in his thought from Deleuze. He uses the idea that in Portuguese is called de vir monstro. He's a Portuguese theorist. And in English, we could translate as the monster becoming, because the idea of devir, devenir, from Deleuze in English, I think it's understood as becoming. So we could understand this as the monster becoming. And what José Gil was saying over there is that monsters are necessary to establish human identity. So while our fascination actually with monsters is because we can understand ourselves as human in parallel to a different idea, an alterity idea, that is this idea of the monster. So this is a very interesting starting point for us over here. A Brazilian theorist called Yada Tuckerman, she got some of the basis from José Gil, and she developed in a book called Brief History of the Body and Its Monsters that there are some political elements in the configuration of the monster and in the idea of normality, because if the monster established like this parallel between human and monster, so we identify ourselves, we are also talking about an idea of normality. And it's interesting to notice that Ieda Tuckerman's work has a very strong basis in Foucault's idea of body and politics and power. So with these starting points, based on this framework, we can establish an interesting dichotomy. Beto, can you pass to the last slide, actually? Yeah, that's it. That's what I am using the PowerPoint for, just to start. So we have this dichotomy that is human monster, normal, abnormal. So this is how we identify what is a monster and what is abnormal. Of course, if it's a parallel, we need to understand as well what is normal and what is human, because the monster is outside of the human, the abnormal, it's outside of the normal. So we need to understand these elements. So what is normal and what is human? This is basically my point of interest. So, of course, while in literature, we have lots of works talking about this, and we can we can make this interpretation of this aspect of the monster as an abnormal being and explore some possible metaphors of this idea. What I want to propose is a return to the conception of human and normal in philosophy, actually, not in literature, because I think this can help us understand the contextual origin of these metaphors. What is a basic difference over here? While we establish an interpretation, a possible interpretation based on production or consumption of some literary work or some filmic work or some artistic work, we are still analyzing through an interpretation form that is based on subjectivity and context and lots of things. We can never have a real idea of what was Bram Stoker's intention when he wrote some of the possible metaphors in Dracula. First of all, we don't have his testimony to do this, and even if we had, even if his widow told something about what was his intention, even with Elizabeth Bisseng's notes for Dracula that we can analyze, there's also a lot of subjectivity over there, and there are a lot of things that change when he writes the book. So it's something that stays really in the basis of the interpretation. But of course, I'm not bringing over here the truth. We are getting out of interpretation and we are getting the truth. I just want to analyze through another perspective, instead of trying to interpret these metaphors, trying to understand the philosophical context that made these metaphors starting to arose. In terms of creation and, of course, in terms of consumption as well, because these metaphors are possible because these artistic works are extremely polysemic. Obviously, my idea here is not giving a detailed investigation of these terms in the history of philosophy, because it would be something gigantic. But what I will do over here is a more generic approach of these elements, very generic, obviously, because I'm talking about mainstream idea, mainstream view. So some details are not specific for my proposal. And I'm going to follow a more post-structuralist view, especially because I started basing the work in two books that follow Deleuze and Foucault. So I think it makes sense for me to continue in this view. So in this sense, I'm not going to talk about philosophy in general. I'm talking about Western thinking. And why Western thinking specifically? Because my focus is the impact in mainstream consumption. So everything that we see in these movies that are presented, in the books that we are talking, they are very impacted by a Western way of thinking. And what is this Western way of thinking? First of all, we have something that I would like to call a normative epistemology. What is a normative epistemology? It is a epistemology that is based on a few elements. That is the transcendental or unique truth. So it's a way of thinking that is based on one truth, and impartiality belief. We are drawing analysis that don't have our bias. A dichotomic thinking, it can be really clearly seen over there, this process of identifying oneself based on difference. So we are talking about a dichotomic thinking over there. One idea that is good, I'm going to return back, that is of cumulative knowledge, right? So this is a dominant thinking that we have in our culture. And of course, it has a basis that is extremely Eurocentric and a very patriarchal narrative. That is the impact that we have in the Western thinking. So these elements, of course, they're going to have a real strong influence in how we think about these elements. First of all, one thing that's interesting, I'm not going to make a whole return to the history of knowledge in Western thought, but I'm going to get just to start with two parallels. We have religious thinking that our Western culture is really based, and afterwards we have the scientific thinking that takes turn to be the answer for our world. So in this religious knowledge, what we have transcendental, it's a Christian knowledge actually, because our influence as a culture is more Christian than otherwise. So of course we have this transcendental or unique truth based on the Christian religion. We have the impartiality belief. We are not following that determined point of view because it dialogues with us. We are following it because it is actually the truth. One curious element over there, for example, the image of Christ. We have this character coming narratively from a very specific part, a very specific region of the planet. And the image that we have of him is like he was Thor from Marvel without working out, without the drugs to emphasize his strength. So of course we have a very similar image from a god from the north, with another divinity that comes from a different place. And of course, this is a creation that is a very biased creation, but it is interpreted as a very impartial image of Christ. And of course, we have dichotomic thinking over there. The notion of good and bad is very present in Catholic thinking. And identification based on differences as well. We have commandments that we need to follow not to be a determined person. Cumulative knowledge is not a case for religious knowledge. It's another element. And then we have this changing of the religious knowledge to scientific knowledge, and science starts answering all our questions. And the curious thing is that when this science comes over there, it doesn't come changing a lot of things that religious thinking was changing, because it continues promoting a transcendental or unique truth. We need to get to the root of this problem and understand exactly this. It continues putting some impartiality belief that the scientist, the philosopher, the academic, we are not following our points of view. Actually, we are seeing the world like it is. And of course, this is a very utopian thinking. The dichotomic thinking is very present as well in our scientific perspective, and the identification based on difference is very common in history of philosophy. And then we have this idea of cumulative knowledge, that the more knowledge we get, the more we grow on this. And this idea of cumulative knowledge, it serves as well to put all of these elements that we have in scientific knowledge as really stronger, because if it's a transcendental knowledge, it's impartial knowledge, and it's cumulative. So science, it's something that we cannot say that there are problems with it. And this is, of course, it is a problem. And it is such a big problem that this scientific knowledge, it also has a very strong participation in the modern idea of a humanist conception. And this modern idea of a humanist conception, it is based on racism, it is based on colonialism, it is based on patriarchy, it is based on homophobia. And of course, we had lots of researchers talking about this. When we talk about racism, colonialism, for example, we had Frantz Fanon in the 70s already talking about this, no, 50s, sorry, talking about this. Recently, we have Achille Mbembe, that is a very famous theorist that he's talking about these elements as well, how this modern idea of a humanist conception put Black people and colonial people as an other that is worst. And of course, we have, for example, Judith Butler talking about patriarchy and homophobia through this modern idea of humanist conception. So it's not something that is not being in debate. Actually, it's a very strong debate that we have through time. What we can see over here is that based on this idea, the difference starts being inferior, has no rights, and is seen as a threat. So the idea of difference is going to be very, very important over there. Of course, we are here in an academic event, and I'm not saying that this is a problem that science maintains today. Of course, we had important changes that broke this perspective. I'm talking about a modern idea over there of this humanist creation, and we had lots of important changes. Just to quote a few, we had Einstein that came with the idea of the relativity theory. So of course, if things are relative, this total transcendental truth starts being questioned. Marx brings the idea of superstructures that we have over there that are responsible for creating and maintaining determined things that happens to our society. And we have Freud that talks about the unconscious. So all of these are important people that are going to start bringing new explorations to science and breaking these ideas of this human transcendental truth. And they put the humanism conception in a problematic position, because we were so sure that we were excellent and rational, and we could think everything in a exquisite perspective. And of course, these theorists are saying that we are extremely influenced by millions of stuff. And these changes, they are going to make a big difference in science. And one branch that interests me a lot is something that happens in France that some people call the French epistemology. Now, these are some authors that started investigating this new scientific scenario. Gaston Bachelard is one of them. That he is a very important person, highlighting that knowledge is not cumulative. It's based on a complex process. So this idea that knowledge is something that is cumulative is totally fake. Actually, what we have over there are configurations and reconfigurations. We establish a paradigm, and then afterwards we have a knowledge that is going to break totally this, and this is how science works. And this that Bachelard says is very interesting for us to come back to that idea that I established a parallel between religious knowledge and scientific knowledge, and it looks like I'm putting both of them in the same sack, but of course I'm not. They are extremely different, mainly in terms of methodological approach. Because when we talk about religious knowledge, we are talking about a knowledge that there is this narrative that everything's over there, but is based on faith. So it's like this, and you believe or not. And when we talk about science, we have a methodological process of trying to prove, and it's fluid process. So this, what we think we know, we start not knowing over there. So that so there is already a methodological difference over there, of course. And with Gaston Bachelard, this methodological difference stays even greater, because by the fact that it's not cumulative, it shows that why we can trust in science, maybe because it's trying to change, it's trying to reinterpret situations, it's trying to reconfigure situations, it's trying to read new scenarios, and it's trying to learn with its own mistakes. But of course, we can't be totally naive with science, because we have Georges Canguilhem as well, that says that science has political interests and attributes moral values and codes. So of course, when we are talking about the scientific thought, we have some elements over there that are not necessarily the ones responsible to highlight what is the modern zeitgeist, the contemporary zeitgeist. The contemporary zeitgeist is actually the narrative that won, the person who had more political context, the person who spoke best in the public, the person who wrote better, the person who could prove better, but not necessarily something that that is the best way of thinking, which is very common nowadays, that we go back to authors that lost battles in a determined part of the science, and another author became the paradigm, the dominant paradigm, and this one got left out. And nowadays we sometimes go back to these ones and say, yeah, I think he was right. So we have these elements over there in science that is very interesting for us to understand this. So this is a very strong basis for the post-structuralism approach that we're going to have over there, that we have lots of authors, but maybe the ones that got more famous would be exactly Foucault and Deleuze, that are the ones that are referenced through José Gil and Dia da Tuckerman. Foucault had this idea of an archaeology and a genealogy as a methodological approach for these elements, that he tries to understand the conditions of possibility that some battles are won. So what are these contexts in which some dominant structure is built, in which some dominant knowledge is consolidated, and then these things. And then he has this genealogical understanding as well, that he is trying to understand the configurations of power inside of this process. So it's going to be very interesting for us to understand this idea of normality and human inside this perspective. And we have Deleuze. Is not going to be my focus over here, but he's very important, especially in my opinion, because of his, although José Gil uses his idea of the devir monstro, the monstrous becoming, I really like Deleuze mainly because of the rhizomatic idea, that he puts this model of understanding things in a rhizomatic way instead of an tree. In Portuguese we would say arborescente. I don't know how to say it, but in a tree model, that's the tree model is this: you go and you follow and you find the root of the problem. So this is a very strong link to this idea of transcendental truth. Thank you, Bernardo. Put arborescent over there in the chat. So this idea of a transcendental truth is the root of the problem, right? And he presents a rhizomatic solution, because actually you're going to look to this, and what you're going to find is arrangements of complexities over there, and you don't have one element, you have lots of elements that are changing all the time, and they are mixing, and they are difficult to understand. What you can do is choose one of these elements and investigate them, but you can never get the true knowledge of anything. And these are very interesting departure points for us in this element. Foucault especially, because we are focused on body and the conception of normality based on power formations. That's something that he's going to talk a lot, with this idea of the biopolitical body that he gets from Plato, but he He dimensions in a new productive structural capitalist perspective, and especially some things some power mechanisms over there that he has that are the legal mechanism of maintaining this biopolitical body and constructing this biopolitical body that we can see in laws and stuff. And one that is very important for us, the idea of norm. Foucault is going to say about this idea of norm that brings normative conceptions. And norm is actually something that is interesting for us because it's something that's not necessarily attached to legal rights, but it's something that is experienced in society as if so. One example, you don't need to be in a society where you have where you have this exemplified in legal treaties that Black people must have less rights than white people. But we continually see this happening in lots of societies, and this is not because of legal elements. Of course, we had a past based on these legal elements, but nowadays these things continue happening legally. They kind of depart from the principle that everybody has the same rights, but with these normative elements over there, this idea of norm, it is not actually what happens. So the idea of norm and these normative elements over there is very interesting for us to understand this difference of what is considered through the eyes of the Western thinking human, what is considered through the eyes of Western thinking normal. If we can perceive that there is a conception of normality, that this is a configuration of power based on obviously hegemonic representation. So we are talking about a specific type of body and social productive bias. We can understand that this idea of what is a monster and what is abnormal is also a power idea. It's very based on power. So if we get back to this idea of a human constructed through modernity, we can also highlight this hegemonic construction. Human, what is human? Human is equal to European white heterosexual cisgender male. What is normal? Normal is equal to European white heterosexual cisgender male. Of course, when I'm talking about this, of course, that women, they are considered human even in this modern perspective. But the rights are not the same. There's not actually, it's not actually a human conception. Yeda Tuckerman, for example, she's not really worried about some racism and colonialism aspects. She talks more about human male and female elements, for example, in her book, approaching these elements than actually other elements. So what this makes, this emphasizes that there is a specific identification of human and normal, which denotes to a specific identification of abnormal and monstrous. That is everything out of this conception. So the monster is actually a non-hegemonic character. He's a minority person. So what is this monster? This monster is obviously everything that runs out of this part. So coming back to that part that we talked about literature and films, these metaphoric monsters that we have over there, that we interpret, that we think about what was determined artist thinking when he produced, or what was the audience thinking when they consumed, why did they interpret like this, is really very influenced by this modern Eurocentric view. And in this case, coming back to the vampire, because I didn't use the vampire only as a hook to talk about the monsters and about these elements, but I really think that the vampire in this case, it may be one of the best cases because for us to work with, because it serves as a metaphor not only for one minority element, but a great amount of them. Because these metaphors normally we interpret like the werewolf is a metaphor for primitive. So we can we can make a fast interpretation of racism and colonialism, modernism thinking. But for example, the vampire is more polysemic in this case, which maybe makes it more interesting. And first, one interesting paradox: the monster is actually the vampire is actually the monster that is more close to human, because it has a bodily representation of the human. So it's a human bodily monster. So it is very closer to the identifications that we have from Foucault's perspective, for example, of norm. The vampire is really closer to the norm than the other monsters. But in another side, it also implicates in basic prejudices that are really common. The primitive, the one from the different parts of the world, the childish brain, the homosexual and bisexual impulses, gender position. Of course, these are not things that I'm talking. I'm inventing. I'm being the first one to say these metaphors are really present in lots of different studies. There is even a very interesting movie that I've seen. I forgot the name, but it's Dracula Pages from a Virgin's Diary. That they intensify this metaphor, changing the aspect of the vampire to Oriental character. So the idea of this racist conception of what is Dracula gets a visuality over there that is very interesting and new. So these metaphors they are not only present in academic view, they are present in the audiovisual perspective and the literary perspective as well. This gender position is something that lots of people talk when they talk, especially of Lucy and Mina. Lucy and Mina, they are the Victorian possible woman over there. Or you are a predator, that is Lucy. That would be the female that wants revolution, wants equal rights. So this is Lucy. She becomes a vampiric woman, or you are a secretary like Mina. These are all possible metaphors and that have been discussed for a long time for different authors. So, of course, my speech here does not implicate that Bram Stoker or other artists that create vampire narratives are racist, sexist, homophobic, etc. Of course not. Especially because if I thought this would be probably the last place for me to share this idea. But of course, they might be. Nobody knows. We don't have interviews about Bram Stoker talking about these debates. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. It's something that's very subjective and has no possible interpretation. But what this actually indicates is that, as Nina Auerbach says, each time or epoch produces a specific vampire. And the zeitgeist of the idea of difference that we had is no longer only a monster, but now it is an important debate. So what I think that these new vampires actually are, they are the zeitgeist of the idea of difference that is now a new and important debate. So these monsters, they are not only bringing new narratives, they are dialoguing with the idea of difference that once they, in a determined aspect of the time, this idea of difference, this idea of a monster was of a villain, of a cruelty, of somebody that needs to be exterminated. And nowadays, in a new contemporary debate, we can also see the idea of difference as something that we've been neglecting for all these years, and we owe a very special retribution for all that we've caused. So that's it. Thank you very much for your patience, and I hope I didn't pass the time.
Thank you very much. You haven't. That's a very big surprise for everyone. Thank you. I'm joking, of course, Yuri. Thank you so much. I'm always really in awe in your ability of talking with such a huge passion and amount of knowledge about the subject for hours on end. And again, thank you so much. That was brilliant. Now is the time for some questions, comments. If someone wants to comment or ask Yuri something,
Yeah,
intimidated
probably
as
very
all.
polemic.
Enrica,
So
we have Enrica. Yeah.
I just want to congratulate you, Yuri, because your insights are very, very helpful for all our investigations. Each year is a pleasure to having your lectures because they open the mind. So thank you very much for such a passion.
thank you very much, Enrique.
Thank you. Gilles, please. Professor Menegaldo.
Okay, I thought there was somebody else. Thank you very much, Yuri. It's greatly great talk. Just to the guy, the film you're referring to is Guy Maddins, I think.
Sorry, I
Guy
didn't
Maddin.
understand. Yeah, Guy Maddins. Yes, that's
Guy
right.
Maddin, the Canadian film, and it's also the interest of that film. It's presented as a choreography. That's a very interesting aspect. No, thinking of the political aspect you were referring to at the beginning, I was thinking of the recent. I think it's a series in which Augusto Pinochet is a vampire, and he's been on for several centuries, and he comes back, well, to become Pinochet. So I think that was a good example. And another example is, of course, not a film, but a comic book or a graphic novel. It's Alberto Breccia using Dracula as a metaphor for the totalitarian regime in Argentina. So that's two examples of the political use of the vampire. Of course, there are many others. And concerning the notion of well, the new vampire, as you said, there's quite a lot of new vampires recently, or coming back to the old. Maybe Demeter is one of them. Renfield, I don't know about it. I haven't seen the film, but I fear the worst with Nicolas Cage as a kind of Bela Lugosi reincarnation. Okay, so I just wanted to know what you thought about. Have you seen these films, and especially the series about Pinochet as a vampire?
Thank you very much. I added El Conde in my list, but I didn't. I hadn't had the time to watch because of this organization. Lots of things to do, but it's in my list. The comic book, I had no idea of its existence. When I write you an email, I'm going to ask you to give it this reference for me. It looks extremely interesting. And Renfield, I really enjoyed Renfield. I'm going to be very polemic now, but I think that Nicolas Cage can go to the Hall of Fame of the Draculas. I think he was great. It's a fun movie, actually. It's not to be a serious movie. And I was thinking, in my first images, I lost a lot of time thinking about the possibility of putting Renfield or not, Nicolas Cage's Dracula over there or not, because it is a funny movie with some doses of action and stuff, but Nicolas Cage is is a villain in the movie. He's not very it is kind of interesting how this nuance that he makes in a certain way a classical vampire villain, but in a movie that is funny. So I got really confused about putting Nicolas Cage's image over there or not, but undoubtedly it's a very this Renfield movie explores a new trend in vampire movies as well, that is this trashy gory, that it's not that trashy gory that we had in the 70s. It's a different trashy gory, more mainstream and more directly funny.
But he already played in a comedy in the late 70s, I think. in which he played someone that was becoming a vampire because of
The Kiss of the Vampire.
The Kiss of a Vampire, which was also a parody or a pastiche of vampire films, which was quite interesting as far as I remember.
Yeah, it is very interesting. These are we all have lots of cases that are very interesting for this. Actually, when I think about this different vampire that we have, I don't think it's something that is happening in the 2000s. I think it's becoming a trend since the 2000s because, for example, if we get the romantic Dracula, for example, Coppola's movies from 92, and the slogan of the movie is "Love Never Dies." So of course it's a romantic movie. Before this, if you Google image Dracula from John Badham, you're gonna see an image of Frank Langella in a horse, looking like Prince Charming. And we have these romantic Draculas before. And one thing that I was going even to talk after your speech is one thing that I've noticed when I saw the first Dracula from Hammer movies again, is that I think it is almost an action movie over there. I think that Peter Cushing, and this may be something funny for me to say, but I think Peter Cushing is the basis for the Van Helsing terrible movie that we had nowadays. Because, but he's the basis here, because normally Van Helsing was just a scientific character, and we had Peter Cushing fighting with his fists against Dracula, very viscerally, like it's a Hammer trend element.
Yes.
Also as a superhero over there. He looks like a superhero.
It's a point I wanted to make, but I didn't have time, but to compare the two, because there are two heroes indeed, or superheroes, and they act exactly in the same way. They jump over the tables. They the strangling is interesting. The strangling sequence is interesting because Cushing pretends to be dead or swooned, and in fact it's a trick to trick Dracula, and it succeeds. So in fact they are equivalents. They have the same age, whereas Van Helsing is much older in the novel, of course, and in the Browning film. Here they are almost the same age, and the actors are more or less the same age as well. I think Cushing is maybe slightly older than Christopher Lee. So there are really alter egos, one representing the good and the other the evil, because as you know, Terence Fisher is also very Manichaean in this moral approach. It's also the fight against good against evil, but they have exactly the same kind of attitudes and the same time of acting techniques as well. Even though Christopher Lee is more concerned with his mouth and the teeth, of course, the fangs, whereas Cushing is more playing with his hands and props. For instance, the recording machine, etc. So I think they are very parallel in their ways of their representation.
This is great analysis of yours. Now that you're saying it's almost a mirroring image that we have for them over there. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I was just going. I'm just commenting.
Bernardo, I think Bernardo has a question. Bernardo Berto has a question over there.
Yeah. I know. We have a lot of questions, and I'm going to in a moment give them the voice. But I just wanted to comment on what was happening here while you were talking, both of you now, and a lot of people are commenting and trying to present a view that actually oh my God, Nicolas Cage, sorry. I forgot the name. Nicolas Cage is in fact a great Dracula, which I share. The view which I share, he was surprisingly good in this last film. So, and again, I agree that there is a trend that's because we had this discussion about the Kiss of the Vampire. We've been having it for several years, but let's leave it aside. And he is surprisingly good, and the trend of new trend of getting back to the classic form in a way. So we have, even if this is a comedy, of course, but we can observe it already. That this is a new trend of getting back to, of monsterizing the monster again, isn't it? Oh, that's what I think. Anyway, so Beto, over to you, because you wanted to ask a question.
Oh, yes, thank you, Magda. I just want to, I don't know if Yuri has time, but we talked yesterday, I guess, or in some day we are talking about the Invitation movie, which brings a new approach. It's a new movie if you all didn't see it because it's a very great and interesting movie about Dracula. And we have the gender and the racial subject in the movie because Dracula has now a black woman bride, and she's completely different from the other two. And I was thinking when you were talking about the biological body and the gender and the sexuality and the difference that this body represents in a vampire and in a monster, and the dichotomy of human and monster. And my question to you is, what do you think in the contemporary media, especially like the Netflix Dracula and The Invitation, that they portray woman in a very animalistic way instead of the rational way as Dracula is? He is a very intelligent, a very rational being. He plans to take over London, so he is thinking. And his brides in the movies and in the series are always animalistic beings without rationalism. They just are pure instinct. And in The Invitation, we see this as a very new approach of these brides, because the brides are rational, they plan, they attack together, they bonding. So I think what you're thinking about this gender thing in the vampire movies, like the vampire male is a rational thing and the vampire female is an animal thing. Thank you.
Well,
Mm.
great question and difficult question, actually. Well, I think, of course, when we talk about this idea of difference, this idea of diversity, it has a commercial background over there. It's because it's the debate is financially profitable. So it's over there. But this doesn't mean that these structures stopped being hegemonic, stopped being sexist, racist, etc. What I can see, and of course, this is not a very research-based hypothesis, because I didn't analyze specifically this, but based on other things that I have seen through the years that I study vampire, I see that these changes, they are more male-guided than female-guided, these changes. And this is, of course, a very symptomatic reflection of patriarchal structure that we have in Hollywood. So, for example, that first slide that I put, we have lots of images of different vampires, men, and we had, I think the only case was Selena from Underworld, probably. I don't remember if there was any other case. I think it was the only case. So, of course, it's very male-oriented and continues being a white male-oriented idea of diversity and of modification. So in this sense, I think that the lack of difference that we have in these Dracula brides might be for one side, because these modifications they take much longer when it's in the female body. Classically, the female vampire is very influenced by the femme fatale figure. And there is this trend in, when it comes to Dracula, of a specific of this animalistic bride of the vampire, that I think it's really attached to Bram Stoker's book, actually, because these brides are not very central in the meaning that they are specific for one part of the narrative in the book, but they are not something that is going to come back all the time. And in the book, they don't have the centrality that Dracula has, for example. So they are like an extension of Dracula. And if they are an extension of Dracula, Dracula is the brain, and they are basically their extension of that. And I think there's a tradition over here in cinema when transposing to Dracula, thinking of new Draculas, new things, new narratives, and not really thinking about new brides of Dracula in this case, because they are not so central to the narrative as like the book. And in this case of this movie that we were talking about is a movie that is very focused on this element. So I think this is the reason why this movie accomplishes to be different and to be more creative, because they highlight specifically in an aspect that is normally not really nobody's interest when it comes in cinema. Nobody normally makes lots of changes over there. Normally, they even repeat formulas. You have, like in that Van Helsing movie that I was talking about, you have the Brides of Dracula, very similar to the Draculas of Coppola. But of course, they are more monstrous because it's an action movie, but aesthetically, they have a lot of similarities over there visually. So I think it's because, of course, a patriarchal structure over there, and because when we talk about Dracula, they are not a figure that have this big centrality in the narrative. But this is like I'm guessing actually, because I never researched specifically this, but it looks like a interesting thing to research.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we have a comment from Alba, please.
Just a super quick remark. So recently, I think that it was about 2 years ago or so, there is a writer that's called, I think it's S.T. Gibson. I think, yeah, that's the name of the woman. That published a Dracula retelling, which is called A Dowry of Blood, okay? In Spanish, it has been translated as Un legado de sangre. I don't know if there is a Portuguese translation in the making. Maybe there is, I don't know. But it's super interesting because it's actually a retelling of Dracula from the point of view of his first bride. And it explores the relationship between the brides. Because they are like, there's a bride, there comes the other. We finally end up with the 3 brides. I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to spoil it, but the book is fantastic. It's stunning. It's really well written. I mean, I really like it. I might be completely biased about it, but I think that it is a very different take from everything that has been done previously regarding this topic. So I'm just like throwing my 2 cents here, just in case someone is curious, wants to check. I absolutely recommend it. Thank you, Marta.
Thank you very much, Alba. Haven't heard about this book, but sounds interesting. I think this is the case when you focus narratively in these characters. I think we can make interesting differences. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank
You're
you very
welcome.
much. Yuri,
Yes.
Yuri, I can't see anyone else, but I have a question to you. I hope that you can hear me.
Yes, I can.
Can you hear me? Yes, okay. So first of all, I just wanted to say something about this allegation that Yuri pronounces every time he has an occasion to do it. Twilight is not my favorite film. He's just been torturing me over the years with it. So this is a joke that we keep having every year. Yes, so that's one thing. And the question about what you were talking about is about this return to monsterization of the monster, which seems to be happening. We have Renfield, which of course is a comedy, but we have a very evil Dracula, if comedic as well. And The Last Voyage of the Demeter, again, this is something that we cannot treat in any other way. Well, the main character is a monster, definite monster, no question about it. So it's as if we're getting back to the classic productions, like even the Hammer horror production. So do you think that what was happening at the beginning of the 21st century is happening somewhere in the background, because I can mention these two productions which are very recent, which are very clearly different from what we were having in the 21st century. So do you think that this trend is going to stop various twilights of this world and other humanized vampires that appeared in such a huge amount recently?
Well, this is a very, very difficult question, but I don't know. In one side, cinematically saying, trends are trends. They go and they come and they go. So in this aspect, perhaps it's something that's going to go away. But in another aspect, as Sean was saying yesterday in his presentation, Hollywood wants money. So if there is this open door of new narrative possibilities, they are probably gonna explore them until they stop doing money. And I think they haven't explored a lot of this. They have already, but I think, well, the sky's the limit. They can explore it in lots of ways. And then I think that the difficult thing to see if this is going to how this is going to play in the next years is because I was working with a basis of this dialogue of these new vampires with these contemporary debates of diversity, representation, place of speech, etc. And this is a contemporary debate that I'm thinking it's not going to end in the next 5 years. I think it's just starting to explode. Here in Brazil, for example, one of the most popular theorists for nowadays is Ailton Krenak, that is an indigenous theorist. So I think these are this is something that is starting to appear, and it's going to get even stronger, this contemporary debate, and of course it's necessary, it needs to get stronger. The thing is, how is this going to play cinematographically? Because one thing that we can see, for example, in the Demeter movie, is that Dracula is back as a monster, but we have a black man as the main character. So this is another way of dialoguing with this. Maybe not necessarily in the vampire aspect now, but there's still a debate over there. And I think that this is a trendy debate, a trendy way of solving problems, structural problems that we have. Let's put a minority character in a narrative that doesn't have this minority character. So, but this is just one way of trying to solve it, and basically it doesn't solve nothing. We continue having racism despite this character being black. It is one tool of giving more visibility to different people, but it's not the only tool. So I don't know if the main thing is that the dialogue in cinema is going to be different with in different ways futurely, or if they are going to continue reconfiguring these elements in the future. And then the other side, you have also the superhero trend, and it was a matter of time for the vampire to become a superhero, because if we get these characteristics that literature established and afterwards cinema started establishing through time of what is a vampire, it's almost a parallel with Superman. So this possibility of having the vampire as a superhero in a world that superhero movies make so much success, it's also a formula that has lots of space over there for directors.
Okay,
Sorry
thank
for
you
not
so much.
answering.
Sorry, no, thank. Well, the usual. Thank you so much, Yuri. That was an excellent presentation. We really loved it. And I believe that there might be some questions, comments for you in the chat, but I can't see it because, well, I can't see it. Let's finish on that. Maybe. Guys, and we have to finish now. Surprisingly, we don't have a delay, so let's continue this way. Thank you so very much. So we skip the coffee break as always. Because it's time for our next keynote speaker, and I believe the last one. So Gareth, you're the last keynote speaker of the conference. And let me just introduce you. I can see that you're there and ready. Just a few words of Gareth. Yes, we can hear you, we can see you. Again, I'm very, very happy to have Gareth with us. Gareth is a personal friend of mine from the UK. I'm going to just read in a moment information about Gareth, but first of all, just wanted to say that we just a month ago or so we've met to form such a marathon of Hammer horror movies, and I was absolutely amazed to see how many details and how much Gareth knows about every Hammer horror movie made. So let me just read a quick introduction. This is actually the quote from Gareth himself. I'm now knocking on the door of 60 years of age and have a number of passions in my life: music, motorcycles, and have never known a time when I have not been passionate about Gothic horror. As a child, when my friends were interested in superheroes, there was only one Batman for me, and that was Dracula. From an early age, when my mum and dad would let me stay up at night to watch horror films, I've had an obsession about British horror films from 1950s to the late 1970s. The production houses of Amicus, Tygon, but most of all Hammer with all their Gothic creations have fascinated me. And I just need to make one more remark that Gareth is totally not connected to academia, so I just wanted to have a guy who is very knowledgeable and a great storyteller with us today to tell us about Hammer horror again, because it's formed to be a day of Hammer horror. We had several people mentioning the films over the course of the day, but the stage is yours now. Over to you, Gareth. Do you need to? Are you going to be presenting something visually? Do we need to?
No, nothing visually at all. This is the first time I've ever used Zoom, and it's probably the first time I've ever done any kind of presentation like this at all. This comes from the heart, and it comes from passion. Passion for the Gothic, passion for horror, and especially passion for Dracula in all his forms. Would you like me to start now?
Yeah. Yeah, but let me just say that some of your audience is on Zoom, as you can see, but some of your audience is in the heart of Transylvania, and we are having this congress here in Brasov in Romania. So that's why I'm here. If you can see me, I'm waving at you. And you have some people in the room as well. Yes, please, the stage is yours. You can start.
I hope you like my phone cover.
Yes, it's wonderful. Although it looks pink. Is it pink?
It's not, it's red. Go on then.
Right then, where would you like me to start? From a very young age, I can go back to 1973. When my mum and dad actually bought me the poster to Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell, I had an instant love for everything Hammer. I was very, very lucky to have a mother and father that is it okay if I move over there a little bit?
That's right. Don't worry about the camera.
Okay. Yeah, I was very lucky to have a very good mother and father who would let me stay up at night to watch the double bells of horror films on a Saturday night and a Friday night. And I cannot really remember a time when I've ever not been interested in Gothic horror. Not just Hammer films, we're talking Gothic horror across the board, Victorian short story writers, Amicus Film Productions, Tygon Film Productions, Tyburn Film Productions, Giallo Films, Mario Bava, etc., etc. But to me personally, I have a great love for Hammer films generally. The atmosphere, the feeling, the directors, the history, and the cast. Hammer films were formed in 1934 by Enrique Carreras, Spanish guy, and Will Hammer, whose name was William Hines. And he was a showman who changed his name to Will Hammer. And that's where Hammer films got their name from. In the 1930s, they were producing films with Bela Lugosi, funnily enough, called The Mystery of the Marie Celeste. In the 1940s, they were making low-budget films, basically adventure films, Dick Barton special agent films, that kind of thing. Run-of-the-mill British films, making mediocre success in those marketplaces. It got to 1954, and by this stage, James Carreras, Enrique Carreras' son, and Anthony Hines, the son of Will Hammer, had taken over the reins of Hammer. And basically, they bought the rights to Quatermass, the Quatermass experiment, which was being shown on BBC at the time. And basically, what they did, they brought that to film. It's still in black and white. And it was directed by a guy called Val Guest, who did some fantastic sci-fi films. If anybody's ever seen The Day the Earth Caught Fire, it is one of the great sci-fi films of all time, and it was directed by Val Guest. But it was such a success of the sci-fi and horror genre, they decided to reprise the Frankenstein role in 1950. They started production in 1956, but it was released in 1957, and it brought the dream team together from, I'll just go back one step. In the early 50s, they bought Down Place as a production studio, which became Bray Studios, Hammer's famous Bray Studios, on the River Thames and next to Oakley Court, the big Gothic mansion, which they used in a lot of the outside settings for their horror films. Also, the Rocky Horror Picture Show, many other horror films have used Oakley Court as their backdrop. In 1957, the team, I have scribbled down a few notes, not that I don't know it's just I don't want to miss anybody out, to be quite honest. You've got the team of, bear with me, well, I don't need it really. You had Jimmy Sangster, screenwriter. You've got Roy Ashton, the cinematographer. You've got Bernard Robinson, who's the set designer. You've got, in my opinion, of Terence Fisher, probably, again, this is very subjective, in my opinion, the greatest horror director of all time. James Bernard, who actually wrote the great musical scores for Hammer as well. Anthony Hines produced production, and that basically at that time, using the Eastman color they had, was the dream team. Jimmy Sangster's script was very, very economical. If you're an absolute want to look at the book and look at Jimmy Sangster's script, you see two totally different storylines. He puts the same elements in and some of the same characters in, but the reason he had to change the story to such an economical level was the budget that they had. They were looking at a budget on that film. If you looked at a film that was Alfred Hitchcock film made the same year, had a budget of approximately $2.5 million, while Dracula had a budget of just over £84,000. So they had to make it a very fast-paced, very economical script. And that's what they did. The script itself has Jonathan Harker, who was played by a guy called John Van Eysen, actually as Dracula, posing as Dracula's librarian. I'm sure you've all seen the film, and I'm sure you all know the storylines of the film. But I mean, we watched it recently, didn't we, Magda? And yeah, he's acting as Dracula's librarian undercover to try and go in to destroy the vampire. I won't go completely into the storyline because most people know it. What I will go into is the feel of the film, the poetic directorial elegance of the film, Jack Asher's cinematography, and the actual set designs on the film were just so extraordinary. It was such a groundbreaking film, very fast-paced. And it was a groundbreaking film for a few reasons. The gore element in the film in 1958 was, the critics hated it. The sexuality in the film, because what Christopher Lee did, he brought a sexuality to the role. He was like, how can I put it, a James Bond figure in the 1950s. He brought that good-looking demeanor that you'd had F.W. Murnau's Nosferatu, you had Universal's very stage-based Dracula of the 1930s, and in my opinion, personally, compared to Christopher Lee, a very stodgy Dracula. Christopher Lee brought a very brooding, dark, menacing sexuality to the role, which I still personally believe is unsurpassed. I'll make an honorary mention to a few other versions of Dracula, which I think are absolutely amazing. If you're looking for one that's quite close to the book, because to be quite honest, I don't think of any, I've ever seen any Dracula film that's been 100% perfectly, that's the Dracula film to the book. But I do think BBC's version of 1977 with Louis Jourdan, it was played in 2 parts. It's about 2.5 hours long. Louis Jourdan played Dracula, Frank Finlay was Van Helsing. And to be quite honest, that's probably my second favorite version of Dracula, of the Dracula on film ever. Back to the 1958 version. As I said, very, very fast paced. John Van Eysen gets killed by Dracula. Peter Cushing plays Van Helsing in a very, very English way. What Hammer did, this is very home counties horror. So Transylvania, everything that they produced was somewhere in mid-Europe. It never gave geographical locations, but it was set for economical reasons somewhere in mid-Europe. So as an example, Whitby was out of the question for budget reasons. The 3 Brides of Dracula were out of the question there was lots of different elements that they couldn't put into the film with the budget they had. But what they did produce was a poetic, gothic, very, very liquid film that just flows, and an amazingly groundbreaking film for its day. And I think it was also very influential for filmmakers in the future where Dracula is concerned. Peter Cushing at that time was already an established movie star in Britain. He was a TV star who'd done 1984, many films. He'd been on the front cover of the Radio Times. He was very, very well known. While Christopher Lee wasn't, he always had bit parts in films because he always said that on as discrimination goes, he was too tall to be a leading man. At 6'4", 6'5", he was too tall. And that always kept him out of that role as being a leading man. And I think after Frankenstein, which he always said he would only play once, Dracula gave him the chance to stamp his authority and his imposing figure with the cinematography and Terence Fisher's direction was breathtaking, to be quite honest, in its day as a whole. Christopher Lee was very happy with the performance. Terence Fisher as a director was always very, very open to ideas, and he loved his cast giving him ideas. And the classic ending at the end of Dracula, which was known in America as Horror of Dracula, and the only reasons it was known as Horror of Dracula, so people didn't think it was the original Universal Dracula. The ending was completely Peter Cushing's idea, where they race, there's a chase back to the castle. They race up the staircase as he's actually trying to bury Mina, played by Melissa Stribling. They race back to this castle with these beautiful sets, race up the stairs, and then a fight ensues. And eventually, Peter Cushing races across the refectory table, rips the curtains down, the sunlight, the 2 candlesticks off the table, forces Dracula into the sunlight, and he's turned to dust. That actual sequence was totally Peter Cushing's idea. And it's still, in my opinion, everybody's got their own opinion, is a brilliant ending to a brilliant film. In Britain and abroad, the film itself cost just over £84,000, and it was a sensation. At the box office, it took over $3.5 million. Now, you've got to remember, we're going back to 1958. That's a heck of a lot of money. The distributors were Universal Studios. And because of that, and the actual success of that film, Universal gave Hammer the rights, just opened up the catalogue and said, right, you have the rights to The Mummy, you can do anything you want out of our catalogue, you can do. And Christopher Lee always had a very good story about Dracula. At the opening of Dracula and the success it had in America, he had a meeting with the bosses at Universal Studios, who actually said that at that time, Universal Studios were going into bankruptcy. They were cash-strapped, and it was the money that they made from the film Dracula that pulled them straight out of bankruptcy and actually saved Universal Studios. So, yeah, that's pretty much the story of what I believe, and it is very subjective, the greatest version of Dracula made. There's been a lot of very good versions since, and it is not close. I've read the book 3 times, and in my opinion, it is the greatest horror masterpiece, Gothic horror masterpiece of all time. I will give a cheeky nod to Salem's Lot, which I think is a brilliant novel. And I do love the way that Stephen King, in the opening, at the start of Salem's Lot, mentions Dracula and the influence it has on his work. After Dracula, Christopher Lee went on, and I believe he's still the only actor to have played Frankenstein's monster, Dracula, and the Mummy. He went on to play many roles for Hammer, many roles for other film production companies, and became a worldwide star. And it was pretty much because of his opportunity that he had with Hammer Film Studios. But after Hammer, he refused to play the part of Dracula again because he didn't want to be typecast till 1965. But Hammer did want to ride on the success of the Dracula format. So in 1960, they brought out a film called The Brides of Dracula, which, to be quite honest, has no involvement with Dracula in it at all. It's a masterful film. It brings all the elements that everybody loves in Hammer films, and everybody that loves about the Bray Studios era of Hammer films together. And as a film in its own right, it's superb. David Peel plays the character of Baron Meinster. He cannot fill the shoes of Christopher Lee as Dracula, and he plays him as a descendant of Dracula. A lot of people see it as a direct lineage after Dracula. The film just carries on. Dracula finishes, this starts. It doesn't, in my personal point of view. It's a story in its own right. And as a story, it's very good. David Peel plays a more androgynous Dracula. He hasn't got the same dark, menacing, noble features that Christopher Lee could bring to the part. He's more of a nasty character, a juvenile character. If you see the film, when he played the film, he was actually 42 years of age. But actually watching the film, you'd think he was in his early 30s. Peter Cushing comes back as Van Helsing, and in Dracula films, it's the first introduction at the start to one of my favorite characters in all the one of my favorite actors in all the Hammer films, which is Michael Ripper. Everybody thinks that who played the most roles in Hammer films, and it wasn't Peter Cushing, and it wasn't Christopher Lee, it was Michael Ripper. He'd always play the landlord, he'd always play the policeman, he'd always play the servant. But the characterizations that he actually brought to the party made a lot of the films. A lot of the average films that Hammer made, he pulled them out of the doldrums with his own skill. The film itself based around leading lady Yvonne Monleur, who is traveling through Transylvania to become a teacher at a local school. I think it's in Kleinenberg. The wheel comes off a coach and she has to stop at an inn for the night. She is put up in the local in the local pub by the landlord, and Baron Meinster's mother comes into the pub and tells us that she can come and stay at the castle. With all the warnings of everybody in the castle, obviously, she says yes, she'll go and stay with the Baron Meinster in the castle. The mother is played by Marticia Hunt in the film brilliantly. And again, with the set design and the color, the atmosphere of the film is sensational. I'll brush over this film a little bit because it doesn't actually have the character of Dracula in it. But some of the sequences in the film, basically, Baron Meinster is kept prisoner by his mother, chained up because she knows he's a vampire. The Baron Meinster woos Yvonne Monleur's character, who lets him loose and lets him free to roam and start killing again. She flees the castle and is picked up by Van Helsing, and is rescued by Van Helsing, who takes her to the school where she's going to be teaching, introduces her and himself, and leaves. The Baron comes over, woos her, asks her to marry him, and she says yes. Now, at this stage, there's a few great moments from some great actresses. I noticed before you were talking about female vampires, and Andre Melly plays one of the most memorable vampires of all time, in my opinion, in that film. And there's some great set sequences in that film where Peter Cushing chases the Baron back to a windmill, and the two brides at that stage of Dracula are there, and the Baron Meinster bites Peter Cushing in the neck. And as Peter Cushing awakes, he has to get a red hot poker with a big iron on it and burn the actual bite and the marks out of his neck that disappear. it's a brilliant sequence. There's other great sequences in as well. But the ending of that film, he actually dies through the moon casts a shadow from the windmill sails of a cross on the ground and is driven into that and dies in the actual shadow of the cross, which is, it's an apt ending to a great film. But again, there was no sign at all of Christopher Lee at this stage. It's a great film in its own right, and to most Hammer aficionados, it's held in a great love and in a high esteem. It took till 1965 for Christopher Lee to be talked back into making a worthy sequel to the original Hammer Dracula, which was Dracula, Prince of Darkness. That film is, I'll just go back a step. The last time that you would see Peter Cushing playing Van Helsing for 12 years was in The Brides of Dracula, and you wouldn't see him again playing Van Helsing for 12 years. So that role had to be reprised, not as Van Helsing, but by different characters in different films. Dracula, Prince of Darkness, still had, obviously, they went back to Terence Fisher, who by this stage had made The Mummy for Hammer, had made The Hound of the Baskervilles, had made Curse of the Werewolf, Phantom of the Opera. He was their leading director. They did have other directors that they worked with, but on their big budget films, what they would call big budget films, they always turn back to Terence Fisher. Dracula Has Risen from the Grave starred, instead of Van Helsing, had an actor called Andrew Keir, who you might all remember, Scottish actor, who played a character called Father Shandor. And basically, that film was about 4 English people, 2 brothers and their respective wives, traveling on a holiday in Transylvania, where they meet in a pub. Father Shandor comes in. There's a great opening scene where Father Shandor actually comes across a staking, stops them from staking a girl, and says, "You're all superstitious idiots." But deep down, he knows that they're quite correct. Father Shandor asks them where they're going, and they say they're going to Carlsbad. And the first thing that he says is, "Whatever you want to do, you've got to do not go to Carlsbad." And he gives them a warning not to go. They don't take his initial warning and hire a coach driver to take them to Carlsbad. On the journey to Carlsbad, it's getting dark. The coach driver says, "It's getting dark, you're going to throws them all out," and basically says, "I'm not taking you any further. It's getting dark. Get out. I'm on my way." So they do. And lo and behold, on the hillside, there's a castle. Beautifully created castle. And the assistant to Dracula, a character called Clove, picks them up in a carriage and says, takes them back to the castle. I'm sure a lot of you do know the storyline where this is leading. It basically leads to, at the castle, there's a table set for the 4 of them. They're fed and watered, but they're quite curious to know that where the Count is. And who is the Count? He said, "Count Dracula has died," but in his will, he basically said any lost travelers en route would be very welcome, will be fed and watered, and be very happy to stay in my castle the night. So they think that they've landed on the fate, apart from Helen, who was played by a character called an actress called Barbara Shelley, who you might know from Children of the Damned, Quatermass and the Pit. She was one of Hammer's leading ladies and shining lights in that era. A great actress. I will remind Magda of this, actually. Last time we were together, we watched Rasputin the Mad Monk. And the actual Hammer at this time had a theory of making back-to-back movies. So they'd make 2 films at the same time, pretty much using the same set and the same characters. So they did that. They actually made Dracula, Prince of Darkness and Rasputin the Mad Monk with pretty much the same sets and the same actors. Obviously didn't put them on the same bill. They had them with other feature films. But anyway, back to the plot. Yeah, Barbara Shelley plays Helen, and it's probably her greatest role. She's the only person in the group that feels terrible about the situation. There's something dark happening. There's something dark going on. And she's not wrong. In the middle of the night, then Clove entices her husband down to the cellar, smashes him over the back of the head. And you've got to remember, this is 1965 we're talking about. Hangs him over Dracula's coffin with his ashes in the coffin. But anyway, the storyline then ensues of they reach Father Shandor's monastery. There is a great representation of Renfield in this film, actually, played by Thorley Walters as a character, who plays a mad character who eats flies and spiders and does everything that Renfield would do in the film. And he's one that lets Dracula into the monastery, who they capture Barbara Shelley's vampire character. The staking scene's brilliant. Probably the greatest part of the film, again, is the chase back to the castle. And they corner Dracula on the ice outside his castle in the moat. And Father Shandor gets out a gun, shoots the ice round him, and Dracula slides into the ice. And that's pretty much his death at the end of the film. The actual closing sequences, you see Christopher Lee sliding into the ice. It's brilliantly shot, brilliantly done. That film in itself was the end of Terence Fisher actually directing the Dracula films. For one reason, they did have him penciled in to play its sequel, which was Dracula Has Risen from the Grave. Terence Fisher, as a director, he wasn't an alcoholic, but he did like a tipple. And before filming started, he was in his local pub, and he'd had on a Sunday afternoon, and he'd had quite a few pints. And he walked out of the pub, crossed the road, a car hit him, and he broke his leg. So he couldn't actually direct the film. So they brought in Freddie Francis instead to actually direct the film. Freddie Francis's directorial style was workman-like. He'd already directed quite a few films for Amicus Portmanteau Films. And he's a very good director in his own right. He directed The Skull. He directed Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, many good horror films. And he comes from a cinematic background. He was a great director, but far more workmanlike than Terence Fisher. And he was a director that Christopher Lee didn't get on with as well. And for that reason, the film doesn't really have the same beautiful quality of the previous 3 films. As a film itself, it's very good. I won't go into many storylines now because I don't think I've got that much time. But some of the main sequences, Barry Andrews plays a great character. And Veronica Carlson plays a great character. Again, Michael Ripper plays Max, the barman, landlord, who plays a brilliant character. There's some great sets and great sequences in the film. And Dracula Has Risen from the Grave became, at that point, Hammer's highest grossing horror film. Christopher Lee at this stage was getting quite bored with the role. He wasn't very happy with the role. And it took him, the ending is very good at a very good ending at the end of Dracula Has Risen from the Grave. A fight ensues between the Barry Andrews character and Dracula. The cross falls to the bottom of the ground. Dracula falls over and ends up impaled on the cross. To dust, his ring, his cape, and everything on the floor. I could go into so much more detail, but I'd probably be here for about 4 hours. Right. That brings on the end of that film. Now, I will say this because it's a bit of trivia. Going back to Dracula, Prince of Darkness, when that opened in Italy, in Rome, in Italy, Christopher Lee and his wife went to the premiere in Italy, and they'd been put up in the mountains in a beautiful location by the film company. And after the ceremony, and he'd had a few beers, and they drove back to the on the way back to their beautiful villa, their car broke down, and it was thundering and lightning. And the car broke down, no mobile phones, didn't know what to do. Christopher Lee said, well, there's a farmhouse just up the road. I'll go up there, see if they've got a phone, and I'll get somebody down phone us to come and pick us up. So anyway, it's pouring down with rain. He walks to the farmhouse, falls over, he's covered in mud. He's wearing his dicky bow and all his full regalia, soaking wet through, knocks on the door. The farmer opens the door, takes one look, see who he is, and faints. So the stories that he actually tells about this thing, and some of the great anecdotes he says about these films are fantastic. Anyway, back to the next film, because I'm going to have to rush, I think. The next film in the series was Taste the Blood of Dracula, and that was the last one that I really want to talk about in detail, because that film was the last one that sequentially starts where the other films end. And that starts off with a character played by Roy Kinnear, who's a traveling salesman, traveling through Transylvania, tries to sell on a coach a guy a trinket. He won't buy it, and they throw him out the coach. And all he can hear is screams, and it's very terrifying screams. And he comes across Dracula from the previous film being killed. So he gathers up the dust, Dracula's ashes, he gathers into a vial, he gathers up the cape, and he gathers up the signet ring. Dracula, Taste the Blood of Dracula was never meant to have Christopher Lee as Dracula in the film. Ralph Bates was meant to be playing a character called Lord Courtney. In the late 60s, Hammer wanted to bring on Ralph Bates as their leading man because he was cheaper than Christopher Lee, for one, and they thought would appeal to younger audiences. So Lord Courtney was going to be their leading man and their leading vampire. But Warner Brothers, who were distributing this film in America and also providing a lot of money for the film, basically said, no Christopher Lee, no film, no money. So they had to go to Christopher Lee, who did not want to play the part, to be quite honest, and pretty much held him for ransom, saying, if you don't play this character, these guys are going to be out of a film, they're going to be out of work, they're going to be out of a job. And you've got to remember, they were still paying him the same wage that they paid him for his first film in 1958. And by this stage, he was an established star in his own right. So basically, they had a character called Lord Courtney, who, it was basically 3 Victorian characters, and it was set in Victorian England. And they were meant to be 3 very well-to-do, very well-respected Victorian businessmen who lived in proximity of each other, that were doing well. And once a month, they'd go into Soho to do charity work for the poor and needy. Well, they weren't going into London to do charity work for the poor and needy. They were going to brothels. They were taking drugs, going to brothels, debauchery, everything. And pretty much they thought they'd seen and experienced everything in life. until they were introduced to the Ralph Bates character of Lord Courtney, who said, you need to go and see Secker, who's the character that was played by Roy Kinnear. He has something that you have to buy. We have to form a ritual. And they resurrected Dracula, pretty much. But in that process, they killed Lord Courtney, who was Dracula's servant. So Dracula basically says, you have killed my disciple, so I am going to kill you. And he basically then goes round from each individual, all three of them, kills them in processes one by one. There's a very good interaction between the actual children of these characters in this film. And yeah, as a film generally, it's good. It has quite a weak ending, in my opinion. But some of the characters in it, one strange thing I thought, there was an actor called Anthony Higgins, whose actual real name was Anthony Adrian Corrie. No, Anthony Corrie. Bear with me. What was his name? Where are we? Scars of that scars. Just bear with me 1 second. Anthony Corlan, that's him. Anthony Corlan, his name. He played a character called Paul Paxton. And Anthony Corlan also played a character in Vampire Circus, another Hammer film. But he didn't think Hammer films were highbrow enough for him, and he didn't want to be associated with Hammer films. So he actually changed his name after the Hammer films to Anthony Higgins, which I don't know how he feels about the Hammer films now, but personally, I think it's a bit sad, if you ask me. The ending of the film is quite weak. Basically, Dracula's driven into a sanctified church. He's up by a stained glass window with a cross which he smashes. He falls onto a sanctified altar and turns to dust. But personally, that is probably the end of the great Hammer Dracula films. After Scars of Dracula, by this stage, American distributors were making their own horror films. Rosemary's Baby was coming up. There was quite a few other horror films that they were producing. But the money, the American money dried up, and American distribution dried up. And the next films had to be distributed by British EMI. And you can see that in the production qualities. You can see it in the production values. And there's still some great elements. The next one in the series was a film that was directed by Roy Ward Baker called Scars of Dracula. And it does have some great moments, but you can see the lack of production value. Roy Ashton had left, the screenplay by Jimmy Sangster. It wasn't done by Jimmy Sangster. Roy Ward Baker did the best with what he had. I mean, he was a great director. If anybody remembers A Night to Remember, the first Titanic film with Kenneth More, he directed that. He was a brilliant director, and he did the best with the plot he had. They were trying to introduce at this time as well too many young characters. There was a young Dennis Waterman in it. There was a young Jenny Hanley in it. And they were trying to appeal to a younger generation. And to be quite honest, the formula was starting to fall apart. It didn't work. After Scar, I won't go over that because unless you would like me to at some stage, the premise of the film. But that Scars of Dracula was the last Victorian set Dracula. Things started to get a little bit of what I would say the sublime to the ridiculous, because it was basically set. The next Dracula film in the Hammer sequence was Dracula AD 72. They tried to bring Dracula up to swinging Chelsea in 1972. And to be quite honest, Dracula lost that presence. They kept him confined just to a churchyard. They kept him confined just to one location. The best part of the film is the opening sequence, which was set in Victorian times. And there's a brilliant fight sequence between Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing as Van Helsing on the back of a stagecoach, on a coach. And there's a fantastic fight scene that ensues. They both fall off the stagecoach, and Dracula is impaled on one of the rungs from one of the wheels of the stagecoach through his heart, and he dies. And that is the best part of the movie to start. We have, it was directed by a director called Alan Gibson, workmanlike, but just didn't have the same visionary quality that Terence Fisher had. And it was a different era. The script was written by a guy called Don Houghton that just didn't, again, have that sense of beautiful poetic practicality that Jimmy Sangster had. And it's got better with age. But as an example of the film, they tried to make it very much like a trendy film. Blow Up, the film Blow Up was in 1966. They tried to make it a trendy London film. Now, Christopher Neame played a character called Johnny Alucard, which obviously to everybody, Alucard Bacula's Dracula, who resurrects Dracula. Peter Cushing plays Lawrence Van Helsing, who is the grandson of Abraham Van Helsing. The whole picture does not work. It's a simple fact. And by this stage, it's a sad parody of Dracula, which it was coming to the end of the sequence. They resurrected him one more time with Christopher Lee as Dracula. And it was the last time Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee would work together, actually. And that was in the Satanic Rites of Dracula in 1973. Sadly, it was directed, the screenplay were done by the same as the previous film. The storyline was interesting. Dracula played a character called E.D. Denham, who was like a Howard Hughes figure, who owned an empire, who, with a load of businessmen, produced a plague virus that was going to destroy the world. And in that, Dracula would be destroyed as well. He wanted to die. There's Freddie Jones plays a great character in it, but to be quite honest, it's a sad ending and a sad indictment to 4 or 5 brilliant masterpieces that Hammer put together. They did make one more film, funnily enough, called Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires. That I really don't want to go into very much, because as a film itself, it was a Hammer collaboration with the Shaw brothers, who were Kung Fu experts. This is 1974, Kung Fu's in fashion. It was a dreary film, filmed totally on location in Hong Kong. It had elements of horror and Kung Fu, which didn't work. Dracula was played by an actor called James Forbes Robertson, who, to be quite honest, is probably the worst Dracula performance I have ever seen in my entire life. He hams it up. He's only in the film because the actual character changes into a Kung Fu martial arts expert, to put it that way, and then changes back at the end. And it's not really worthy of me talking about that film. I like to remember Hammer as the Bray Studio days, the early Pinewood Studio days, and the early Elf Street Studio days. So you're looking at Dracula Horror of Dracula. You're looking at Dracula Prince of Darkness. You're looking at Dracula Has Risen from the Grave, and you're looking at Taste the Blood of Dracula. And they, to me, they're the linear films back to back that, to me, as a child in my teens, I don't think how many times I've watched them. I probably know them off by heart by now. Dracula as a character I also adore. I love the theme of vampires generally. I am a great believer in tradition myself. I am not a fan of the Buffy the Vampire Slayer type vampire. I think vampires are meant to be feral, evil, nasty. They have no. They have they're psychotic. They have no other values but demonic values that they hold for themselves. The Count himself has sad elements, a lot of sad elements in the Count. And Christopher Lee plays them to perfection. I think I'm going to have to leave it there because I think I'm probably running out of time. But if anybody's got any questions,
Yes,
you'd like to ask me, I'd be more than willing
exactly,
to.
because I think that Gareth, thank you so much. I bet that people have comments and questions, so let's have this several minutes. But first of all, thank you so much for this presentation. I just again so many anecdotes, so many information about the production of the movies that you are taking out of your head, which is wonderful. I've never met anyone outside academia who was as obsessed on any subject as you are. And that was thoroughly enjoyable. So I'm very happy that you agreed to do this, even though you haven't done such a speech before. So I'm just opening the stage for any questions, comments, please, either from the room or from Zoom. Any comments, any questions? Let me just...
Hi, Gareth. First of all,
congrats
for your presentation. And I would like to ask if you think that from Dracula AD 1972 and the other two films that followed, The Satanic Rites of Dracula and The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires, that if these movies were responsible to give, if you attribute to these movies the new breath of air on the urban vampire myth, especially Dracula 1972, such as we would have so many examples right on the 1970s, such as Blackula or Martin by George R. Romero. You think that Dracula's movies, these last three ones, were responsible?
Personally, I think Hammer could have done a much better job, and they had a few opportunities to reprise the vampire myth, and they were missed opportunities. I don't know if you've seen the film Captain Kronos, Vampire Hunter. Right, Captain Kronos, Vampire Hunter, by this stage in Hammer's lifetime, Brian Clements was on board. Brian Clements was a brilliant man. He made the Avengers series. He made the Thriller series. He made The Professionals as a series. He was a brilliant man. And Brian Clements actually went on to buy Hammer eventually at one point. He actually was responsible for Hammer making the Hammer House of Horror in 1980. And Brian Clements actually made a film in 1972 called Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter, which had Captain Kronos played by an actor called Horst Janssen. And the leading lady was Carolyn Monroe. And it had a lot of great elements and it had a lot of great characters. The only reason it wasn't a success is because it didn't have any kind of advertising in America or any type. It was actually made in 72 and it sat on a shelf till 1974. And it wasn't released in America till 1974, but with very little publicity. And it is a great film. And what Brian Clements wanted to do, and it nearly happened with the BBC, was make Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter into an hour-long TV series. And it is a crying shame that didn't happen. That was, in my opinion, the way Hammer should have gone, because it kept the older type setting, but it gave the vampire a more modern vibe. The vampires in that film drained the lifeblood, the life soul out of people. So instead of draining their blood, young innocent victims were turned into old crones, and they died. It's definitely a film worth watching. I would watch that because it puts a different element into the vampire myth. And I think personally, that's the direction that Hammer should have gone. I think it's very hard myself to put the character of Dracula into a contemporary setting because his character intrinsically is noble. His character is intrinsically from that era. But there are other characters that you could use to be brought into a modern setting. I am a great believer in traditionalism where vampires are concerned. Again, there's very few authors, in my opinion, that have brought vampires into a contemporary setting, and it's worked. I did mention before Stephen King with Salem's Lot. He did it to perfection. He kept all the elements. When you read the book, in his foreword in the book, he names Bram Stoker's novel as his major influence. And it was, you can see the vampires in that book are up-to-date vampires. Basically, Salem's Lot is Dracula meets Peyton Place. So he gets that small town feel. And then it starts an infestation of your classic style vampires. And it works. And I think the problem was that you know, there was an American, Toby Hooper directed Salem's Lot in 1979. Again, it was remade in 2004, but it's not as good as the original version. The original Salem's Lot, an amazing film. And Hammer couldn't compete with that at the time. The last film before Hammer actually closed was The Lady Vanishes. They'd gone back with Elliot Gould. And it was just, the people that were running, Anthony Hines, who was one of the great driving forces behind Hammer, that made a lot of the great decisions about Hammer, who put directors in place, who put scripts in place. If you ever see a Hammer film that has a script writer of John Elder, that is Tony Hyde's pseudonym. He actually wrote under the name of John Elder as well. He actually left Hammer in 1969. And you can see a downward spiral from there, especially in the Dracula franchise. In the 70s, Hammer did still make some great films, but they didn't make
Gareth, sorry, I have to stop you because I know.
No, that's fine. That's okay. I usually do waffle on.
You're going to be talking forever, so guys, take it for a discussion outside the meeting because there are some more questions waiting. Sorry, Bernardo, if I'm interrupting the discussion here. But we had Sean who wanted to say something. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was just curious if you could speak for a moment on if the hello, I'm coming to you from America.
Oh, nice to meet you.
I was wondering if you had any insight as to why Peter Cushing didn't come back for the middle three films.
Peter Cushing played Van Helsing, obviously in the first film. Peter Cushing, at that time, was very busy. He was doing a lot of work for Amicus Film Productions. He was doing a lot of work, to be quite honest, he was still doing quite a lot of work for Hammer Film Productions. But it was actually Hammer. They didn't ask him to come back to play Van Helsing.
Oh, wow.
What he did do, if you know the film Dracula, Prince of Darkness, they used the ending of the original Dracula as the start of where he chases up the stairs. You can see all that at the start of Dracula, Prince of Darkness. And it shows Van Helsing, and then it goes on to say 10 years after these events, etc., etc. Now, Hammer was still using Peter Cushing at this time, and as a thank you, they did ask him actually that if they could use that at the start of the film. And Peter Cushing said, yeah, it's not a problem to me at all. You can use that. And he didn't ask for any payment at all. And after the film was released, they actually bought him a sports car and presented it to him to say, thank you very much. Yeah, Hammer bought him a sports car. And basically to say, thank you very much for letting us use that. They realized what they had in Peter Cushing. Peter Cushing was such an actor of an attention to detail. He used to use cigarette lighters and just certain things. His acting, he never hammed anything up with the worst scripts in the world in certain films. He never hammed it up. But Hammer never ever intentionally meant to have him in those films. They never actually. Yeah, he wasn't in the running for those films. He was always in Baron Frankenstein. I mean, in the Frankenstein films, leading up to the horror of Frankenstein, which Ralph Bates played, which was directed by Jimmy Sangster, and to be quite honest, is an absolute turkey. The Dream Team got back together actually for Frankenstein in 1973 with Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell, where they brought Peter Cushing back as Victor Frankenstein, and that's an absolute classic. But they never actually had any intention. It wasn't Peter Cushing not wanting to play Van Helsing. They hadn't any intention for him to play the role.
Is it cost?
That's excellent. Thank you for that.
No, it's a pleasure. Oh, no.
Thank you very much. Gareth, I said that I've never met anyone as obsessed with the subject from outside the academia as you, but actually you've just met another one, Sean. you guys should really talk to each other, because I want to be a fly in the wall there. Okay. Thank you so much. Yuri, I believe that you wanted to say something before, or has it just been answered already?
Actually, I was going to make a general observation that I thought it was a very interesting presentation, very enlightening.
Thank you.
It is, Magda said that you're not from academia. And this is very interesting because we had two presentations that talked about Hammer and what were from theorists today. I think that they are still here. Gilles was very focused on Hammer, and Philippe talked about Hammer a little bit, but it wasn't his main focus. And the non-academic aspect that you brought on your presentation was very interesting because it was informative and it gave different elements to this almost a Hammer day full that we had today. So thank you very much. It was very nice. I really enjoyed your presentation, and I think that these non-academic perspectives are really enlightening sometimes, even in terms of research for us as theorists as well. And congrats.
Thank you very much.
And I need to say that your visual helps to get entertained, because for old rockers like me, you look like Robert Plant or Roger Daltrey, so that helps a lot as well.
I'm an old rocker as well.
Yeah, so it helps.
I was thinking myself at Led Zeppelin when I first saw you. Really, it was very interesting. I didn't catch everything from the beginning, but while I was listening to you, I was wondering, how do you feel about? Maybe you said that, but I didn't catch it, about the novel. So you spoke about films. That was really interesting. And I was, it was just
I first read the novel as a kid. I've read the novel 3 times. I first read the novel probably when I was about 10 years of age. And as Magda said, when I was a kid, I was never interested in superheroes at all. To me, it was Gothic horror. To me, it was Dracula. I think the character of Mina. I think, to be quite honest, in a day and an age Victorian, how she can take a lead character as a strong woman really is quite a shining light in the era. And that's one of the elements that shines through for me. Dracula himself, I find, is quite a sad character.
Yeah.
Quite a sad character. And a noble character, which very few vampires in myth and legend have ever shown that nobility quality, that noble quality. The Van Helsing character, obviously in the novel he was Dutch, but in the Hammer films, he was totally English. The Van Helsing character in the book is brilliant. As a novel, I think it's probably my favorite. I've read hundreds and hundreds of novels, and I would say probably it's my favorite. Without doubt. I've mentioned Salem's Lot quite a few times. That's probably my second favorite novel. But as a novel, I would say Dracula is. Yeah, without doubt. It put a mark on my life from a very young age that has never left me, and I'm sure I'll read it at least a couple of times again. It's the way it's strung together. As soon as you pick that novel up from the first page, you cannot put it down. It's that kind of book. Yes,
we were talking about it. We were talking about it this morning. My professor was saying that it has no limits. Practically, you can find things over and over again. You can discover new ideas. You can research on something else that has never been spoken about before.
Absolutely. It's like a good progressive rock album. You listen to a progressive rock album.
Yes, I love progressive
you can listen to it 10 times and you'll pick out different elements each time. And you can't listen to it just once and make your mind up on the album. You can listen to it and it takes you ages. Every time you listen to it, you pick out different elements in that album. And Dracula is very similar to that. The Renfield character is an example. You know, every time you read it, you pick up on different characters. And again, it's a one-off novel. I've never read any Gothic horror novel like it. There's some great ones out there and some great authors, don't get me wrong, but where he got his inspiration from and how he put that novel together is beyond me, you know, for the time it was written. And the times I go back to it and the times I've read it, you're absolutely correct. I pick up different things and different emotions and different characters. Yeah, very much so. I always like the Whitby setting myself as well. I'm a great fan. I was born in Yorkshire.
Yeah.
And me and my partner in crime here, Dagmar, who sat next to me. You can just see her hand there.
Hello.
Who also has a great. She loves the horror. She loves horror films. I'm very lucky because she loves horror films.
And progressive rock music.
And progressive rock music.
That's
for that
great.
matter as well. But no, we do go to Whitby. We've been to Whitby a few times, and you only have to go to Whitby to feel the atmosphere, see the elements, and see where Bram Stoker got his inspiration from.
Okay, thank you very much.
Exactly.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Gareth,
One more thing, Magdalena, if I may. Yesterday, Professor Krishan, during his presentation, said that in Romanian, Dracula was first translated, and the book appeared only after 1989. So late.
Is that right?
Late. No,
wow.
I found something a few days ago that there was a translation via French. So it wasn't a direct translation, but an indirect translation from French language in 1928 and 1929, which was published in a magazine. So I haven't spoken with my professor about this, but I just wanted to share it with you. So
that's great. That's quite incredible, isn't it? To think that.
Yes, it is.
It's incredible.
And the last thing I want to say, because I haven't seen you before and I didn't have the chance to talk to you, is that I'm from Lugoj, where Bela Lugosi was born.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. What a great character he was.
Yeah.
Gabriela,
yeah.
this is fantastic. Thank you very much for the question, Gabriela. Just a comment on your revelation about the first Dracula translation. It's probably something that will interest Hans very much because he's the hunter for the early versions. So yeah, we would probably you need to tell us about it next time.
Yes, I can tell you one more thing, that there is this book that was printed this year, 2023. The editor is a teacher, a person with studies of translation, the same as as me, and she has made some research, but anyway, I found it really interesting that we had that this novel before, and I had the occasion to read a few pages, and the translation sounds very well. So I look forward to buying this book and to see about it.
Oh, very interesting. Okay, guys, we've run out of time, and Ryan is waiting for us and probably starts wishing us not very well. So Gareth, I have to. Well, I don't have to, but I want to thank you so much for this presentation. That was inspiring. That was really fantastic. And if you have a chance to come and join us next year, that would be a pleasure to have you with us as well.
I think both Dagmar and myself are going to book it. We're definitely coming next year.
Oh, hopefully.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much.
You.
Bye.
Thank you so much.